The pencil trembled slightly in his hand. November 7th, 1944. Somewhere in northeastern France. Wehrmacht. Officer Erloyd Friedrich Hartmann stared at the words he'd just written in his field journal. Words that could get him shot for defeatism if the wrong person read them. But he couldn't deny what his eyes had seen through the binoculars. Black American tank crews, moving with a precision that rivaled the best panzer units he'd witnessed in 3 years of war, coordinating fire and maneuver like they'd been doing this for a lifetime, breaking through fortified German positions in under 4 hours. His hand moved across the page again. These Negro tankers demonstrate tactical sophistication we were assured did not exist. Their combat effectiveness exceeds numerous Wehrmacht formations I have observed. Either our intelligence assessments are fundamentally flawed, or we have been systematically deceived about the capabilities of these men. Everything the party had told him, everything he'd been taught about racial hierarchy, was unraveling in real time. The propaganda had been so certain, so absolute African soldiers were primitives, incapable of operating complex machinery, unable to master modern warfare. America's weakest element, they'd called them, the racial liability that would crumble under German steel. Yet here they were, 712 men of the 761st Tank Battalion. First day of combat, not tucked away in some supporting role, not held back from the real fighting. They were the spearhead. Leading General Patton's Third Army offensive into the heart of German-occupied France. The entire defensive line had prepared for what they thought would be an easy victory, a chance to prove Nazi racial theories correct on the battlefield. Instead, they were watching those theories disintegrate under the treads of 30-ton Sherman tanks, commanded by men they'd been told were inferior. What none of them understood yet, not Hartmann, not the Wehrmacht commanders, not even some of the American generals, was that this moment would become something far bigger than a single battle. This was the beginning of a systematic demolition, not just of German defensive positions, but of white supremacist ideology itself, written in combat statistics, proven in blood and fire, documented in ways that no propaganda could erase. The mathematics of ideological collapse were being calculated in real time, not in university lecture halls or political manifestos, but on frozen French soil, where truth couldn't be hidden behind lies. And it all started more than 2 years earlier, on a sweltering Louisiana afternoon in April of 1942. Campuir, Claiborne sprawled across the pine forests of central Louisiana like a temporary city. Dust hung in the humid air. The sounds of drilling soldiers echoed across training fields. And on April 1st, the 761st Tank Battalion officially came into existence, an experiment. That's what the Army brass called it, an experiment they didn't actually believe in. American military doctrine in 1942 was built on a foundation of institutional racism that stretched back generations. Black soldiers were considered unsuitable for combat roles. Period. The prevailing wisdom, if you could call it that, held that African Americans lacked the intelligence for complex military operations. They couldn't handle the stress of battle. They'd panic under fire. They were fit only for labor battalions, kitchen duty, supply work. The creation of the 761st wasn't some enlightened policy decision. It was a grudging political concession. Black newspapers had been demanding it. Civil rights organizations had been applying pressure. The Roosevelt administration needed to appear responsive, so they authorized a black tank battalion, but nobody in the war department actually expected it to succeed. Among the men who reported to Camp Claiborne that spring was a 23-year-old from Oklahoma named Ruben Rivers, part Cherokee, part black, raised in the small town of Hotulka, where he'd worked his family's farm until the land couldn't support them anymore. Then he'd worked for the railway. Hard labor, long hours, the kind of work that built strength and endurance without breaking your spirit. When his draft notice arrived in January of '42, Rivers didn't try to dodge it. He showed up, ready to serve. His service record would note something unusual, an instinctive mechanical aptitude combined with natural leadership ability, the kind of soldier who understood how things worked. Not just tanks, but people. Others arrived from every corner of Black America. Leonard Smith from New York City, William McBurney from Pennsylvania coal country, Preston McNeil from the Texas cotton fields. Different backgrounds, different accents, different stories, but united by two things: the call to fight fascism abroad and the reality of facing racism at home. Their commanding officer was a white lieutenant colonel named Paul Bates. And Paul Bates was different. Most white officers given command of black units treated it as punishment, a career dead end, something to endure until they could transfer back to real units. Bates saw it differently. He genuinely believed in his men's capabilities, not as some kind of liberal experiment or political statement. He simply understood a truth that most of the Army hierarchy refused to accept. Given proper training and equipment, black soldiers would prove equal to any troops in the world. His challenge wasn't the enemy, it was his own military's prejudices. So Bates made a decision. If the 761st was going to succeed, if these men were going to get their chance to prove themselves, they'd have to be better than everyone else, not equal, better. The training regime he implemented was deliberately brutal. The 761st trained harder than equivalent white units, longer hours, higher standards, more repetitions. They had to, because every mistake would be magnified. Every failure would be used as evidence of racial inferiority. Every shortcoming would confirm the prejudices of skeptical, superior officers who were waiting for them to fail. Pressure was immense, but it forged something unbreakable. They started on the M5 Stuart light tank, 13 tons of steel powered by a radial engine that sounded like an angry hornet's nest, armed with a 37mm main gun and 3 30-caliber machine guns, fast, could hit 36 miles per hour on good terrain, but lightly armored, vulnerable to anything bigger than small arms fire. The Louisiana heat turned the tank interiors into ovens, 120 degrees Fahrenheit on a typical summer day. The metal surfaces too hot to touch with bare skin. They practiced anyway, hour after hour, day after day, learning to maneuver, learning to communicate over crackling radios, learning to coordinate movement with precision timing. Driver, gunner, loader, commander. 4 men who had to function as a single organism. A tank commander's order had to be executed instantly. No hesitation, no confusion. A gunner's aim had to stay true, despite the vehicle bucking over rough terrain. A loader had to feed shells into the breech without pause, maintaining a rhythm even when exhaustion threatened to shut down his muscles. A driver had to navigate obstacles while monitoring engine temperature, fuel consumption, track tension, a dozen variables simultaneously. They practiced until coordination became instinct, until they could operate effectively even when fear and adrenaline flooded their systems. And they excelled. By August of '42, when the battalion moved to Camp Livingston for large-scale maneuvers, their proficiency ratings matched those of veteran white armored units. Observers noted their discipline, their mechanical skill, their tactical awareness. In mock battles against other units, they performed admirably. Their maintenance records were exemplary. Their gunnery scores were high. By every objective measure, they were ready for combat. But the deployment orders never came. White tank battalions shipped out to North Africa, to Italy, eventually to France after D-Day. The 761st remained stateside, month after month, training, waiting, watching. Other units deploy while they stayed behind. The official reasons varied, depending on who you asked. Not enough black support personnel to sustain a black tank battalion in the field. White infantry units wouldn't accept black tank support. The experiment needed more observation before field deployment. The Al-Aberdeen. Real reason was simpler. The army didn't believe black soldiers could fight effectively. This belief, rooted in prejudice rather than evidence, kept the 761st in an endless training cycle while the war raged. Overseas. In April of '43, they participated in Third Army maneuvers at Camp Polk, large-scale exercises involving thousands of troops across hundreds of square miles of Louisiana terrain. Again, they performed admirably. Again, they received no deployment orders. The frustration became corrosive. These were men who had volunteered or been drafted to fight fascism, men willing to die for their country, confined to training camps because of the color of their skin. The irony wasn't lost on them, preparing to fight Nazi racial ideology while experiencing American racial prejudice firsthand. The contradiction deepened in September of '43 when the battalion moved to Fort Hood, Texas. That's when they finally received their Shermans, the M4 Sherman medium tank, America's workhorse, 30 tons of steel powered by a radial engine producing 400 horsepower, armed with a 75mm main gun, later upgraded to 76mm for better armor penetration. This was a real combat vehicle. The men threw themselves into mastering it. The Sherman was larger than the Stuart, heavier, more powerful, more complex, wider turning radius, greater fuel consumption, more sophisticated fire control systems. They learned it all enthusiastically, finally, equipped with tanks that could stand up to German armor. But Fort Hood sat in the heart of Jim Crow, Texas, and the contradiction between their mission and their treatment became unbearable. Off base, they faced segregation everywhere. Separate bathrooms, separate water fountains, separate waiting rooms in bus stations. Restaurants refused to serve them. Businesses turned them away. Local police harassed them for the crime of wearing their country's uniform, while black-white civilians treated them with open contempt. On base, conditions were only marginally better. Black soldiers and white soldiers trained separately, ate separately, slept in separate barracks. Even the post-exchange and movie theater were segregated. One incident crystallized everything. July of '44. Second Lieutenant Jack Roosevelt Robinson, an exceptional athlete who would later break baseball's color barrier as Jackie Robinson, refused to move to the back of a military bus on Fort Hood. His battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bates, supported him, but senior officers intervened, transferred Robinson to another unit, court-martialed him on trumped-up charges of insubordination. Robinson was eventually acquitted, but too late to deploy with the 761st. The message was unmistakable. Black soldiers, no matter how capable, would be treated as second-class citizens. Then, finally in June of 1944, the deployment order arrived. After 2.5 years of training, 2.5 years of proving themselves over and over, the 761st Tank Battalion was alerted for overseas movement. The men could hardly believe it. D-Day had happened on June 6th. Allied forces were establishing beachheads in France. The need for armored units was desperate. Finally, they'd get their chance. August 27th, '44. New York Harbor. The troop ship HMS Esperance Bay waited at the dock. 712 men boarded with their personal equipment. They couldn't bring their tanks. Those would be issued in England. But they brought everything else: weapons, tools, spare parts. the accumulated gear of an armored battalion. The voyage across the Atlantic took 10 days. Cramped quarters, bunks stacked 4 high, meals served in shifts, but spirits were high. After years of waiting, they were finally going to war. They understood the weight on their shoulders. They'd be the first black armored unit to see combat in the European theater. Other black units had fought before. The 92nd Infantry Division in Italy, separate artillery battalions supporting white divisions. But no Black Tank Battalion had entered combat in Europe. The 761st would be first. Every action would be scrutinized, every mistake magnified. Success would challenge prevailing assumptions about race. Failure would confirm them. Upon arrival in England, they received the latest Shermans, the M4A3 variant with the upgraded 76mm gun, significantly better armor penetration than the 75mm they'd trained on. The longer barrel and improved ammunition gave them a fighting chance against German Panthers and Tigers. The M4A3 also featured the Ford GAA V8 engine, 450 horsepower, better acceleration and hill climbing ability than earlier models. These improvements mattered in tank combat. Speed and firepower often meant the difference between survival and death. They trained briefly on British soil, familiarizing themselves with the upgraded vehicles, conducting gunnery practice, running tactical exercises. The training was compressed, intense, only weeks to master new equipment before shipping to France. Then they crossed the Channel, October 10th, 1944. They came ashore at Omaha Beach 4 months after D-Day. The beachhead was secure, but the remnants of battle still littered the sand. Destroyed equipment, shattered fortifications, the ghostly atmosphere of ground paid for in blood. The 761st moved quickly inland, by rail and road, toward the front lines. October 28th, they reached their assembly area near the French-German. Border General George Patton had specifically requested them for his push toward the Siegfried Line. Patton was known for aggressive armored warfare tactics, known for his controversial personality, known for complicated views on race. He'd served with Buffalo Soldiers early in his career and respected their fighting ability. Yet he also harbored the prejudices common to his generation and social class. When Patton addressed the 761st on October 28th, his speech was characteristically blunt. "Men, you're the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you weren't good. I have nothing but the best in my army." He paused. "Let that sink in. I don't care what color you are, as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches." His voice hardened. "Everyone has their eyes on you. Everyone's expecting great things. Most of all, your race is looking forward to your success." Another pause. "Don't let them down. And damn you, don't let me down." The speech was vintage Patton. Profanity mixed with motivation, mixed with acknowledgement of the racial dynamics at play. The men understood the subtext perfectly. They were on trial. November 7th, 1944. First combat. The objective was a German-held town called Morville-lès-Vic in northeastern France. Strategic crossroads, fortified by German forces who'd repelled previous American attacks. The 761st was attached to the 26th Infantry Division and ordered to break the stalemate. Captain John Long of B Company led the assault, a no-nonsense officer from Detroit who'd earned his men's respect through competence and courage. Behind him, Sergeant Roy King commanded the lead Sherman. The attack began at dawn, as King's tank entered Morville-lès-Vic. A German soldier fired a Panzerfaust from a building window. The shaped charge rocket struck the Sherman's flank. The explosion disabled the tank, wounded 2 crew members. The situation turned critical instantly. The lead tank was immobilized, blocking the narrow street. German defenders were converging on the position. King and his crew dragged the wounded men to cover behind the disabled tank. Then, using small arms and the tank's remaining operational weapons, they killed the Panzerfaust gunner and eliminated the crew of a nearby German anti-tank gun. The rest of B Company pushed forward. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers encountered a German roadblock, a felled tree reinforced with mines, blocking the advance. German mortar and small arms fire pinned down the accompanying infantry. The entire attack threatened to bog down. Rivers didn't hesitate. He dismounted from his tank under direct fire, attached a tow cable to the roadblock, climbed back into his Sherman. His tank dragged the obstacle clear. The column advanced. The infantry broke free from their exposed position. For this action, Rivers would receive the Silver Star. By the end of November 7th, Morville-lès-Vic was captured. The Germans had defended stubbornly. The cost was significant. Sergeant Roy King died of his wounds. Other casualties mounted, but the 761st had proven something fundamental. They could fight. They could win. More importantly, German prisoners revealed something unexpected. Confusion. Wehrmacht officers had been told that black American soldiers were poorly trained, poorly led, would break under pressure. Instead, they'd encountered a well-coordinated armored infantry team that maneuvered with precision and fought with determination. One captured German officer compared Sergeant King's conduct under fire to that of veteran Russian tank crews. High praise from an enemy who'd fought on the Eastern Front. The 761st pushed forward. November 8th, they fought at Vic-sur-Seille. November 9th, they assaulted Château Salins after a 4-hour battle. November 10th, they captured Dieuze. Each engagement reinforced the same pattern. The Black Panthers, as they'd nicknamed themselves after their unit insignia, fought effectively, adapted to changing battlefield conditions, achieved their objectives. At Vic-sur-Seille, they encountered German defensive positions that had repelled previous attacks. The town sat on elevated ground with clear fields of fire. German anti-tank guns covered the approach roads. The 761st coordinated with infantry, used smoke to obscure German observation, suppressed defensive positions with tank fire while infantry advanced under cover. They took the town with minimal casualties through superior tactics. At Château Salins, they faced more determined resistance. German troops had fortified stone buildings, creating strong points that dominated the town center. Tank main guns proved effective against these positions, reducing them methodically while infantry cleared surrounding structures. The 4-hour battle demonstrated the battalion's growing combat. Effectiveness? They were learning, adapting, improving. With each engagement, the men themselves were surprised by how well they performed under fire. Years of training had prepared them technically, but combat revealed character. Fear was universal, but they functioned despite it. The sounds of battle, the smell of cordite, the sight of casualties, all the sensory overload of combat became manageable through training and leadership. Tank commanders made decisions calmly under fire. Crews executed orders despite danger. The battalion functioned as designed. Sergeant Warren Creasy became legendary for his courage. When his Sherman was knocked out by a German anti-tank gun, Creasy jumped out, commandeered a machine gun from a nearby half-track, and used it to eliminate the enemy crew. Then he climbed onto another tank and continued fighting. His actions earned him a battlefield commission to second lieutenant. Over the entire campaign, Creasy's combat record would become extraordinary, fighting at the front continuously, demonstrating tactical skill and personal courage that earned respect from everyone who witnessed it. These qualities, repeated across the battalion by dozens of men, defined the unit's character. This wasn't just one or two exceptional individuals. This was an entire battalion of trained, motivated, capable soldiers performing their duties under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. But the most remarkable story belonged to Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers. November 16th. Rivers was leading a company's advance toward Gwebling when his Sherman struck a mine at a railroad crossing. The explosion tore through the tank's belly armor, sent shrapnel ripping through the crew compartment. Rivers took the worst of it. Metal fragments slashed his leg from knee to thigh, cutting down to the bone. The wound was catastrophic, required immediate evacuation. Captain David Williams, the company commander, reached Rivers' position with a medic. They carried morphine to dull the pain before evacuation. Williams later recalled the conversation. "Ruben, you're going back. You've got $1 million wound. This is your ticket home." Rivers refused. He wouldn't accept morphine because it would cloud his judgment. He wouldn't accept evacuation because his men needed him. The medics cleaned and dressed the wound as best they could, but Rivers could see German artillery observers marking their position. He climbed into another Sherman and took command. Through the night of November 16th, Rivers remained with A Company as they prepared to assault Gwebling. By dawn on the 17th, his leg had swollen grotesquely. Infection was setting in. The wound was turning gangrenous. Every movement caused visible agony. Captain Williams again ordered evacuation. Rivers again refused. "Captain, you know better than that. This is going to be tough." He led the assault into Gwebling. His tank crew later reported that he directed their fire through gritted teeth, sweat pouring down his face from pain and fever. The Germans defended Gwebling fiercely. The 761st lost 3 tanks to anti-tank fire and 1 to mines just taking the town. Rivers' Sherman engaged enemy positions throughout the day, knocking out machine gun nests, suppressing German infantry. Through November 17th and 18th, Rivers continued commanding his tank. His condition deteriorated rapidly. The infection was spreading. Medical officers who examined him in the field were horrified that he was still fighting. By the morning of November 19th, Rivers was clearly dying. His leg was black with gangrene. Fever racked his body, but a company was ordered to advance toward Burgeltroff, and Rivers refused to be left behind. At dawn, a company pushed out from Gwebling. Almost immediately, they came under heavy anti-tank fire from concealed German positions. Captain Williams ordered his tanks to pull back to cover. Rivers radioed that he'd located the enemy anti-tank guns. He and another Sherman moved forward to engage, covering the company's withdrawal. The German guns concentrated fire on the 2 exposed American tanks. Armor-piercing rounds struck Rivers. Sherman repeatedly. One penetrated the turret. The tank exploded. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers died instantly. 2 other crew members were killed. The survivors were wounded. Rivers had fought for 3 days with a wound that should have killed him on day 1. His leadership and sacrifice enabled a company to capture 2 heavily defended towns and inflict significant casualties on German forces. For his actions from November 16th to 19th, Rivers would eventually receive the Medal of Honor, though not until January of 1997, 53 years after his death. The 761st kept fighting. There was no time to process grief. The war demanded constant forward motion. December 16, 1944, Germany launched its last major offensive in the West. The Battle of the Bulge. It caught Allied forces by surprise, created a dangerous salient in American lines, threatened to reach the port of Antwerp. The 761st was rushed north to help contain the German breakthrough. They were attached to the 87th, infantry division and thrown into the fight for the Belgian town of Tillit. The movement north was chaotic. Allied forces were scrambling to respond to the surprise German offensive. Roads were clogged with retreating units, refugees, supply columns. The 761st moved through this chaos, reached their assembly area on January 6, 45, went into action immediately. The battle for Tillit proved to be one of the fiercest engagements the Black Panthers fought. German SS panzer troops defended the town with fanatical determination. Elite units, experienced soldiers who'd fought on the Eastern Front and knew how to defend against armor. They'd prepared Tillit carefully, positioned anti-tank guns to cover approach routes, mined roads, fortified buildings. They were determined to hold. Winter weather added another layer of misery. Temperatures dropped below freezing. Snow accumulated several feet deep. Visibility was often reduced to meters by blowing snow. The cold was brutal. Tank engines struggled to start. Mechanical systems froze. Ammunition had to be warmed before loading, or it would jam. Crews wore every layer of clothing available, still suffered from the cold. The Sherman's narrow tracks struggled for traction on frozen ground. Tanks slipped and slid on ice. Movement that would have been simple in summer became treacherous in winter. During the Tillit operation, the 761st encountered something new: psychological warfare directed specifically at them as black soldiers. German radio broadcasts jammed American communications channels. A voice. American-born propagandist Mildred Gillars, known as Axis Sally, delivered her message. Good morning, Negro soldiers of the 761st. I am sorry that you will die today in Tillit. Our fight is not with the Negroes in America. Your fight is not with us. She paused for effect. Your fellow Negroes are rioting in Cleveland. Your commander, Captain Williams, is leading you to death. He is white and not one of you. Your battalion commander, Major George, is also white and not one of you. Music played in the background. Louis Armstrong's I Can't Give You Anything But Love, Baby. Leave your tanks now and return home to Cleveland, where you are needed. You will not be killed. The psychological operation was sophisticated, designed to exploit racial tensions and convince black soldiers they were fighting a white man's war. It failed completely. The two men of the 761st understood exactly what they were, fighting for, not just against Nazi Germany, but against the very racial ideology that Axis Sally's broadcast represented. Tank Commander Frank Cochrane's response, radioed to his company, became legendary. They've hit me 3 times, but I'm still giving them hell. The 761st captured Tillit after days of brutal close quarters. Fighting, German defenders were shocked when they surrendered and discovered that black soldiers had defeated them. Many Wehrmacht soldiers had internalized Nazi propaganda so completely that, encountering skilled black tankers, produced cognitive dissonance. How could an inferior race defeat superior German troops? German prisoners captured by the 761st often displayed visible confusion and fear. One prisoner at Tillit asked, "What are you doing here? This is a white man's war." The answer, obvious to everyone except true believers in racial theory, was that Nazi racial ideology was simply wrong. Nazi propaganda about black soldiers had been extensive and widespread. The regime had conducted propaganda campaigns depicting black people as subhuman since the 1920s. Long before the war began, these campaigns served multiple purposes: reinforced Nazi racial theories at home, prepared German soldiers to view their enemies as inferior, attempted to divide Allied forces by exploiting racial tensions. Hitler's Mein Kampf, written in the mid-20s, contained explicit references to contamination of the white race through contact with black people. The book argued that racial mixing would lead to the decline of civilization. These weren't fringe beliefs. They were central Nazi doctrine, taught in schools, preached in propaganda, enforced through law. The Nuremberg Laws of 1935, primarily known for targeting Jews, also applied to black people in Germany. People of African descent were classified as racially alien. They faced legal discrimination, social ostracism, eventually violent persecution. Approximately 500 Afro-Germans were forcibly sterilized under Nazi racial hygiene programs between 37 and 45. The goal was preventing what Nazis called racial contamination. During the war, German military distributed propaganda leaflets to black American soldiers, attempting to convince them they were fighting for a nation that oppressed them. These leaflets depicted scenes of lynching and discrimination in America, asked black soldiers why they were fighting for a country that treated them as second-class citizens. The psychological operation was sophisticated but ultimately ineffective. It underestimated black soldiers' understanding of what they were fighting against. Nazi cartoons depicted black soldiers as primitives incapable of modern warfare. German propaganda magazines published illustrations showing black American troops as savage subhuman figures who threatened civilization. Wehrmacht soldiers were exposed to this propaganda throughout their training and service. Many internalized it completely. German military intelligence assessments of American forces consistently underestimated black units, predicted they would break under pressure and fight poorly. These assessments reflected ideological bias rather than objective analysis. When reality contradicted these predictions, many German soldiers experienced cognitive dissonance that began cracking their faith in Nazi ideology. The reality proved devastatingly different. The 761st continued operations through the winter of 44 and into 45. They fought in the Rhineland campaign, breached the Siegfried Line in March of 45. This accomplishment was particularly significant. The Siegfried Line, known to Germans as the West Wall, was a series of fortifications along Germany's western border, stretched nearly 400 miles from the Netherlands to Switzerland. More than 18,000 bunkers, tunnels, tank traps, concrete fortifications housed anti-tank guns and machine guns with interlocking fields of fire. Dragon's teeth, pyramid-shaped concrete obstacles, blocked tank movement. Minefields covered approaches. The Germans had spent years building these defenses, considered them virtually impenetrable. Breaking through required coordinated infantry tank assaults against prepared positions, defended by experienced German troops now fighting for their homeland. From March 20th to 23rd, 45, the 761st achieved one of its most impressive tactical victories. 4-day operation breaking through fortified Siegfried Line. Positions near Rheindorkheim, they inflicted approximately 4,000 enemy casualties, killed and wounded, captured 3,200 German prisoners. The Recife breakthrough allowed Allied forces to advance deeper into Germany, collapsing German defensive lines, hastening the end of the war. This single operation demonstrated the full evolution of the battalion's combat effectiveness. The inexperienced unit that had entered combat in November had become a veteran formation capable of executing complex combined arms operations against determined opposition. Their success proved that skill, training, and leadership mattered more than race. By late March, the Black Panthers were among the most experienced armored units in Patton's Third Army. German prisoners taken by the 761st were treated according to the Geneva Convention, with professionalism and humanity. This behavior, so at odds with what German soldiers had been told to expect from black soldiers, created another crack in Nazi ideology. The Nazis had lied about black soldiers being murderous primitives. What else had they lied about? Some German prisoners later testified that capture by Black American troops was the moment they began questioning everything the Third Reich had taught them. At the end of March, the 761st crossed the Rhine River and pushed deep into Germany. The Rhine crossing was a major Allied operation. The river had served as Germany's last major natural defensive barrier in the West. Once across, Allied forces could advance into the industrial heart of Germany. Over the following weeks, they participated in the encirclement of German forces in the Ruhr pocket. This massive operation trapped hundreds of thousands of Wehrmacht and SS troops, effectively ending German capacity to defend Western Germany. The Ruhr was Germany's industrial heartland. Losing it meant losing the capacity to produce weapons, ammunition, supplies. The 761st's role was maintaining pressure on retreating German forces, preventing them from establishing new defensive lines. They conducted pursuit operations, moving rapidly to keep enemy units off balance. The pace was exhausting, but exhilarating. After months of slow, grinding combat against prepared defenses, they were now pursuing a broken enemy. They captured dozens of towns whose names blur together in after-action reports. Small German villages, farming communities, industrial suburbs, each had to be cleared. Each might contain defenders. Tank crews remained alert despite fatigue, scanning for threats, ready to engage. Throughout the campaign, they maintained operational effectiveness despite equipment wear and continuous combat stress. Tank maintenance was crucial. Tracks wore out, engines needed service, weapons required cleaning. The maintenance crews and supply personnel who kept the tanks running rarely received recognition. But without them, the combat crews couldn't have functioned. Working through the night, often under fire, they replaced damaged parts, repaired broken systems, kept the Shermans rolling. Some vehicles that should have been sent to rear area maintenance depots were kept operational through improvisation and determination. In late April, the 761st received orders to push toward Austria. They were among the first American units to link up with Soviet forces advancing from the east. April 26, 1945. Steyr, Austria. Tanks of the 761st met Soviet armor. The meeting was symbolic. Allied forces from west and east had split Germany in two. The Third Reich was finished. For the men of the 761st, the encounter with Soviet soldiers proved memorable. Soviet tank crews included women. Leonard Smith, a gunner, recalled being embraced by a Russian woman tanker who shouted, "America!" repeatedly, while nearly crushing him in her enthusiasm. The cultural exchange was brief but meaningful. Soldiers who'd fought across thousands of miles to defeat fascism shared a moment of triumph. May 8, 1945, Victory in Europe Day. TD2, or in Europe officially ended, the 761st Tank Battalion had been in continuous combat for 183 days. No other American armored unit in the European theater fought for so long without relief. This extraordinary record would be officially recognized in the Presidential Unit Citation, signed by President Jimmy Carter in 1978. The statistics of their service were remarkable. 4 major Allied campaigns: Northern France, Rhineland, Ardennes-Alsace, Central Europe. They fought across 6 countries: France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Germany, Austria. Liberated or captured over 30 towns. Over the entire 183-day campaign, they inflicted approximately 130,000 casualties on German forces through direct combat, artillery coordination, and combined operations with infantry divisions. 3 officers and 31 enlisted men killed in action. 22 officers and 180 enlisted men wounded. when including replacements, received and subsequently lost over 6 months of continuous combat. The overall casualty rate approached 50%. For their service, members of the battalion received 11 Silver Stars, 69 Bronze Stars, and approximately 300 Purple Hearts. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers received the Medal of Honor posthumously in 1997. In 1978, President Carter awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, recognizing their extraordinary heroism and performance. But the most significant impact of the 761st cannot be measured in statistics. Their combat performance fundamentally challenged racial assumptions that had dominated American military thinking for decades. They'd proven that black soldiers, given proper training, equipment, and leadership, performed as well as any troops in the Army. This evidence would play a crucial role in the political and military push to desegregate the American armed forces. But the return home proved bittersweet. The men of the 761st had fought courageously for their country, defeated an enemy dedicated to racial supremacy. They expected recognition, respect, gratitude. What many received instead was renewed discrimination. Veterans of the 761st returned to a segregated America. They couldn't eat in certain restaurants, couldn't stay in certain hotels, couldn't live in certain neighborhoods. Men who had commanded tanks in combat found themselves relegated to menial jobs. Heroes who had earned Silver Stars faced casual racism from civilians who'd never left home. The disconnect was painful and radicalizing. The men of the 761st had risked everything for America. They'd proven their worth in the most demanding crucible imaginable. Yet they still faced second-class citizenship. This experience, shared by thousands of black veterans returning from World War II, fueled the growing civil rights movement. If America could ask black citizens to fight and die for freedom abroad, it couldn't justifiably deny them freedom at home. The argument became impossible to refute. Black veterans had demonstrated courage, competence, and sacrifice equal to any American. Soldiers, denying them equal rights at home while celebrating their victories abroad, exposed the moral bankruptcy of segregation. The political pressure became overwhelming. Organizations like the NAACP used the combat records of units like the 761st as evidence in their campaigns for equality. Black newspapers published accounts of battlefield heroism alongside stories of discrimination at home. The contradiction became too glaring to ignore. Veterans testified before Congress about fighting fascism abroad while facing discrimination at home. Their testimony carried weight that no academic argument could match. They had bled for America. They had proven their worth under fire. They demanded recognition. White veterans also played a role. Many soldiers who had served alongside black support troops or been supported by black tank battalions in combat returned home with changed perspectives. They had seen black soldiers fight and die. They had been saved by black tankers. Their testimony challenged the assumptions of those who had never served. Military commanders, including some who had initially opposed black combat troops, submitted reports documenting their effectiveness. The evidence was overwhelming. President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981 on July 26, 1948, mandating the desegregation of the United States Armed Forces. The order cited the need for equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race. Truman acted partly from moral conviction and partly from political calculation, but the combat record of units like the 761st provided the empirical justification he needed. The order faced significant resistance. Some military leaders argued that integrated units would harm combat effectiveness. Some Southern politicians threatened political retaliation. Some officers resigned rather than command integrated units, but the order stood. Implementation was gradual, took several years to complete fully, but the principle was established. Race would no longer determine military assignments or opportunities. The combat performance of units like the 761st Tank Battalion provided crucial evidence that segregation was not just morally wrong, but militarily ineffective. Integrated units, military studies concluded, would perform at least as well as segregated ones and would better reflect American democratic values. Project Clear, a study conducted by the Army between 49 and 51, examined integrated and segregated units in combat during the Korean War. Its findings confirmed what the 761st had already proven. Race had no correlation with combat. Effectiveness, training, leadership, and unit cohesion mattered. Skin color did not. The legacy of the 761st extended far beyond military policy. Members of the battalion became educators, business leaders, civil rights activists. They carried with them the knowledge that they had proven something fundamental. When given equal opportunity, Black Americans achieved at the highest levels. This knowledge, born in combat, shaped the rest of their lives. They returned to communities across America, bringing with them not just combat experience, but a transformed understanding of their own capabilities and their rights as citizens. They had commanded complex machines in battle, made life-and-death decisions under fire, proven themselves equal to any soldiers in the world. This experience made them unwilling to accept second-class citizenship. Quietly, they became activists, educators, community leaders who demanded the equality they had earned through service. Some pursued higher education using the GI Bill. The Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944 provided educational benefits to veterans. For many Black veterans, this represented their first opportunity for college education. They attended historically Black colleges and universities across the South. They enrolled in integrated universities in the North and West. They pursued degrees in engineering, medicine, law, education, business. Their wartime experience had shown them what they could achieve. Their education gave them tools to achieve it. Captain Ivan Harrison, who commanded troops in the 761st, later became a physician. He attended medical school after the war, completed his residency, practiced medicine for decades. His path from tank commander to doctor exemplified the potential, unlocked when barriers fell. Harrison's story was repeated across the battalion. Men who might never have attended college in a segregated America used their veteran benefits and their proven capabilities to build professional careers. Leonard Smith worked for the New York Transit Authority Police, rose to a position of responsibility. He served his community in uniform again, this time as a law enforcement officer rather than a soldier. His military experience prepared him for this role. The discipline, the leadership training, the ability to function under pressure, all skills learned in combat served him well in civilian life. Countless other veterans of the battalion contributed to their communities, carrying with them the pride of having served in a unit that changed history. They joined churches, civic organizations, veterans groups. They coached youth sports teams, mentored young people, served on school boards and city councils. They were active, engaged citizens who had earned their citizenship through service and demanded it be respected. Some became teachers, bringing military discipline and high expectations to their classrooms. They taught in segregated schools across the South, preparing the next generation of Black Americans for the opportunities they knew were coming. They taught in integrated schools in the North and West, demonstrating through their own achievements what Black Americans could accomplish. Their presence in these roles challenged stereotypes and opened minds, Others went into business, starting companies, creating jobs, building wealth in their communities. They used skills learned in the army, organizational ability, leadership, mechanical knowledge, to build successful enterprises. They proved that Black Americans could succeed in business just as they had succeeded in combat. Their success created economic opportunity for others and demonstrated pathways to prosperity. In 2005, the United States Army dedicated a monument to the 761st Tank Battalion at Fort Cavazos, Texas, formerly Fort Hood, where the battalion had trained. The monument features 4 black granite tablets surrounding a marble sculpture of a kneeling tanker. Surviving veterans attended the dedication ceremony, many in their 80s, some in wheelchairs, all proud of what they had accomplished 6 decades. Earlier, the inscription honors their 183 consecutive days of combat without relief and their role in breaking Nazi racial ideology through demonstrated excellence. The 761st Tank Battalion demonstrated through action what words alone could never prove. They showed that courage recognizes no color, that skill is earned through training, not inherited through race, that leadership emerges from character, not complexion. They fought 2 wars simultaneously, one against Nazi Germany across the battlefields of Europe, another against the assumption of black inferiority that pervaded their own society. They won both wars through the same method, relentless excellence under impossible pressure. Every tank battle won became evidence against racial prejudice. Every German position captured became proof of capability. Every day of continuous combat without relief became testimony to endurance and professionalism. The Wehrmacht soldiers, who had been taught that black soldiers were inferior, learned the truth in combat. German troops, who expected easy victories against racially inferior opponents, discovered instead determined, skilled, and courageous adversaries who outfought them repeatedly. When German prisoners expressed shock at being captured by black tankers, they were confronting the collapse of an ideology built on lies. When the 761st entered combat on November 7, 1944, they carried more than ammunition and fuel. They carried the hopes of millions of black Americans who wanted the chance to prove their worth. They carried the burden of representation, knowing that their performance would be generalized to judge an entire race. They carried the weight of history, understanding that their actions would shape military policy and civil rights progress for generations. They bore these burdens for 183 consecutive days of combat. They never faltered. They never broke. They never gave their enemies or their doubters any evidence to support racial theories. The Black Panthers of the 761st Tank Battalion proved that Nazi racial ideology was not just morally reprehensible, but factually wrong. In doing so, they helped dismantle similar prejudices within their own nation. Their legacy extends beyond the battlefields of Europe to the ongoing struggle for equality and justice. They demonstrated that when barriers fall and opportunity opens, excellence emerges regardless of race. That lesson, written in blood and fire across the frozen fields of France, the fortified hills of Germany, and the winding roads of Austria, echoes still in every integrated unit that serves today, in every soldier who commands based on merit rather than skin, color in every American who understands. That capability knows no racial boundary. The guns of World War II fell silent 8 decades ago, but the victory won by the 761st Tank Battalion continues, not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of everyone who understands what they proved, that excellence has no color, that courage has no race, that when given the chance, given the training, given the opportunity, every American can rise to greatness. The Black Panthers proved it. 183 days. One tank battle at a time.